Storywork is brought to you in partnership with Slingshot. Slingshot are Australia's creative media experts, and having worked successfully with them for years, I'm thrilled to have them on board.
You're listening to a DM podcast.
If you replaced Disney with Bendigo Bank and Pixar with Ferocia, that's exactly how Up was created.
Things aren't all going great. You've got family tragedy. You've got all sorts of rocks thrown in your way. But through that, you are resilient and you keep moving forward and you keep seeing a future.
Like, I have a lot of money, but I don't have enough money to change the entire venture startup ecosystem in Australia. I was able to bring billions and billions of dollars to the Australian tech ecosystem.
And it's leverage, it's amplification, it's impact, as you say. Did you really think, is this the best place for my skill set? Or did you just think this is an exciting thing to do? Because it must have been a big Band-Aid to rip off.
And so I felt like the biggest impact I could have is to use that capital to help create more DOMs.
As an investor and a mentor, and someone who's got the most extraordinary track record, what do you look for in great founders and great founding teams? Well, hi there. I'm Matt Jones, and welcome to Storywork. It is fantastic to have you with me, and it is difficult to do justice to the achievements of my guest on the podcast today. Dom Pym, a fintech founder, an angel investor, and just a fascinating human being, had the most extraordinary conversation with me. I couldn't cover everything he's done, from founding Up Bank to building a record label to his efforts in philanthropy, but everything that made it into the podcast you need to listen to. Because I caught Dom when he was reflecting on his life after a period of illness that stopped him very temporarily in his very fast tracks. And when you listen to Dom, you're getting this view into the matrix that is his mind. It's extraordinary the way he thinks. It's extraordinary the passion and the genius he has for entrepreneurship, for innovation, for technology, for finance. But it's also extraordinary how he combines these beliefs with a passion for design and storytelling and creativity and trusting brilliant, often maverick people to do amazing things in really divergent industries. And he's done all this after a childhood that was full of setbacks and challenges. People who endured an early life like Dom's are not normally the kind of people we see using $100 million of their own money to back entrepreneurship. And yet here he is today, one of the people doing more than anyone to build the next Australian dream and make our country a world leader in innovation and possibility. I think this is a really special conversation. Listen in. Dom Pym, welcome to Storywork. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Mate, I know you've not been super well for a little while, and how are you feeling? And did you manage to, at some stage, come out of the worst of being ill and actually sort of enjoy that period of maybe being forced to slow down for a bit?
That's a good question, because a lot of the time you're going 100 miles an hour and you forget to slow down. So I had bacterial pneumonia and I was in bed for about 10 weeks. You're fine, you just can't breathe. And if you don't get oxygen to your brain, it's hard to think. So you sort of just lay there like a bit of a zombie.
I mean, that's the first big insight on this podcast. Yeah, the importance of oxygen, that will be the title.
Very important. You pretty much just lays about the place. So I watched a bit of Netflix. But while I was in bed, I started writing a book. And I found all my old hard disks. And I've got this old RAID array. And it actually worked. I booted it up. It was 33 years worth of data. Every year's sorted in little folders. I was very fastidious back then.
I'm fascinated by the process of writing a book. I wrote a book called Lessons from Gin about my sort of gin journey. And I sort of reflected a bit on my upbringing. And it turned out that it only started getting relevant when I went into the world of work. And my first job was in military intelligence. And, luckily nothing bad was happening in the world at the time because I wasn't very good at it. But I learned how good I was with words and language and storytelling. So I pretty quickly got out of the intelligence bit and just into the communications bit. What do you think your childhood gave you? How did it shape you in ways that were then relevant?
Oh, absolutely formative. My 13th year was extraordinary. So many ridiculously amazing but also destructive and crazy things happened when I was 13. I'm in the process of writing it all down, but like death and destruction and police and sickness and all sorts of horrible things were going on in my life. At the same time, it was so formative And a lot of the storytelling for me comes from my grandparents. And, one of my grandparents would drop into their house every day on the way home from school and do woodwork, and he'd tell us stories of the good old days. And he used to be a policeman, so he had plenty of stories. And then our other grandpa, we used to ride our bikes all the way over town. He was across the other side of Melbourne. And we'd stay over there, and he'd teach us to play cards. And he was a great storyteller, so he always had a yarn. And he was sort of Irish background and sort of had lots of sayings and sort of Cockney English and, all this sort of stuff. And he was just a real character. And so I think between the two grandpas particularly, and then I had two favourite uncles, one on my mum's side and one on my dad's side. And when I reflect back and think about my childhood, those two uncles were very formative. One of them was a mechanic. The other one was an Olympian and a bricklayer.
Where did your appetite for risk come from? I think the AFR once referred to you as crazy. Where did that risk appetite come from?
Yeah. I think that those formative years, 13, 14, like I was working in a printing factory and a bookbinding factory underage. I didn't know it at the time. And a disaster struck. I was using I think it's a 2-ton or a 4-ton book press that gave me an appreciation of excellence and design and things like this. But what it does is it crushes the binding of the book to give it the curve that you see on those old legal books and things like that. And of course I stuck my hands in it and it crushed my fingers. And it was pretty devastating, end up at the hospital and all this sort of stuff. You can sort of see I've got like crazy fingers, like this one's crazy. But this one actually I've had surgery, it's been rebuilt. But these experiences, they shape you. And playing football was another one. Like I was in a team where I won best and fairest 3 years in a row, but we never won a game. And so when you're losing all the time, you're striving to win. You're very competitive. It's about leadership and camaraderie and culture. And so I think some of those experiences that happen around 13, 14, 15, they totally gave me an appreciation for how hard life is and how hard you got to fight to win. I think that helped form this idea of risk. But a lot of other crazy things happen. Like I had a pet duck and he died. I had to bring him back to life, mouth to beak resuscitation. My mum died. Like she had an allergic reaction to medications and penicillin. And my brother and I had to do CPR and bring her back to life. Those sort of things change you. I mean, we sort of, at one point we lost everything, lost the house, lost the car, we sort of lost everything. There's a great photo that I have of my dad riding my BMX. And when I think about that photo, he was out looking for a job or doing the shopping or whatever, and, we didn't have the car. And I think about that. I was a bit of a strange sort of eccentric unit because I was Dux of the year level. I'd win the maths and spelling competition and all that sort of stuff, but I was also captain of the footy team, and I'd win the cross country and the little athletics and all that sort of stuff. So very overachieving in academia, in computers and technology, as well as in just general curiosity, but then at the same time very sporty and very fit and healthy. And so I had like everything in life going for me, but everything was going wrong. So I think that teaches you resilience. And I often say that you need curiosity and confidence. And I had those two things in spades. But I think the thing that I learnt was resilience, the sort of ability to push through and be positive. Like I'm a very positive person. Like I surround myself with positive people. And I think the ability to see something in the future, 30,000 foot, and dream about what could be better, and then actually just go and build it. Like that's something that it's almost innate. It's hard to learn that. There's
such a balance though, isn't it? Because one of the things that I find sometimes exhausting about this modern world we're in, and I think a lot about LinkedIn as I say this, there is almost this cult of toxic positivity. And I think there's an art to being incredibly positive and incredibly optimistic and being able to dream the future, but also recognize that not everything goes right. And so sometimes when you see people who are down, not just to assume that they weren't positive enough, but to recognize, as happened to you at different stages, that sometimes life's just got a different plan for you.
We had a crazy time. And people see something like Up and they think, oh my God, privilege, amazing, look at this hard working, it's so cool. And actually, fighting from nothing to create something of value. It's partly why I spend a lot of my time now helping others and giving back and trying to elevate the Australian ecosystem, because I just want others to have the same opportunities and sort of chance to be successful that I managed to create really for myself. I didn't have others around me making it happen. It wasn't given to me. It was something I had to work extremely hard for.
Well, let's rip into that. So obviously I was incredibly thrilled that you were able to come on, because Up, I think, is one of the most extraordinary brands built in Australia in the last 10, 20 years. But your story is so much more than Up. So let's start there. I've read you talk about yourself as a 30-year overnight success story. What do people like me miss when we just look it up and we go, oh my God, out of nowhere, suddenly this extraordinary brand and extraordinary business emerged? What backstory do we miss?
Yeah, well, my first serious company, like Splat Printing and Computing, was, it was a real company, but a bit of a hobby, and it was sort of the beginning. But there was a company called Zudio. So when I was 19, I got a job with SAP, which was the second largest software company in the world. And I worked there for about 7 years-ish, all over the world with Fortune 500s. I call it the baptism of fire. I mean, there'll be a chapter of that in the book. It's outrageous. And that experience working with all these big enterprises, big brands that you know all over the world, big governments, military, all sorts of, aerospace and, automotive, all sorts of crazy things. It gave me this unrealistic expectation of what the world is about. Living in Silicon Valley during the dot-com boom and then the dot-com bust. Like you can't write it. Like you can't imagine. I was in a plane crash, the first Qantas plane crash in Bangkok in '99. All these crazy things were happening in my life, and I just wanted to come back home to Australia, and I did. I came back and I bumped into, there was a fellow that I met in the elevator on my first day at SAP. And I'm an undergraduate. They've never employed an undergraduate before, so there was no undergraduate program. I'm the first one in the world and the youngest employee ever. So, and I applied to all the big tech companies, your IBMs, your Microsofts, your Oracles, your SAPs, everybody. And I sort of played them off against each other, took the job at SAP because I thought, they power all the brands that I love. So imagine if I worked with them, I'd get a chance to work with all these other brands. Anyway, the guy that was in the elevator on the very first day that I worked at SAP, when I'd moved back 7 years later, after living in Singapore and South Korea and Silicon Valley and the UK and all this sort of stuff, he said to me, I've got a band, and I want to quit SAP and start a record label. So I would say that record label was foundational to everything we've done at Up. Like, two of the people that I recruited at that record label, that we recruited out of university, worked it Up. They followed me through 5 or 6 different companies. They both still work in DOM sort of enterprise, Euphemia-funded companies now. And a lot of the, I would call them Ferocia alumni. That Ferocia is the software company that built Up. So we call it Ferocia, the Ferocia alumni or the Ferocia mafia, and that's what sort of everyone knows Ferocia and Up. But actually it started at Zudio. Like these two people, for example, have worked with me for 22 years across that whole journey. And they sort of became foundational to the culture. So when I look back, I've been trying to lately map who's who in the zoo. Who are all these people that worked at PIN Payments or worked at Zudio or worked at Saratoga or worked at Clear Grain Exchange and all these sort of the journey before we got to Up. So for example, we built the largest independent record label in Australia. Then we built the largest music school in Australia. Then we built the world's first grain exchange.
I just want to briefly go back to your mate at SAP. He's in a band and he says to you, hey, Dom, I know you're, this incredibly successful young graduate who showed up at SAP and you're working at the heart of the technology and the software that's powering the planet. Come and start a record label with me. That feels like a real sliding doors moment. And I'm interested because I hope a lot of people listening to this podcast are reflecting on something that I think is going to be really important for all of us, which is what's the story of our career and our skill set? Because the world's going to get very odd in the next few years. And I'm interested in that moment, did you look and go, is there an entrepreneurial role for me to play, me, Dom, in this tech company, or is there a tech role for me to play? Like, did you really think, is this the best place for my skill set? Or did you just think this is an exciting thing to do? Because it must have been a big Band-Aid to rip off to leave SAP and that global exposure and go into the record industry.
Yeah, it also made me broke. It's a massive leap of faith. And what was happening at that time in the early 2000s, so I was living in Singapore at the time when they first suggested this idea. I decided to relocate back to Australia so I could start the record label, but I spent 6 months doing SAP and building the software engineering team in Australia. They'd only had software engineering teams in Germany, the US, and then Japan. So it was a brand new thing to build that in Australia. So I did that for a while. And then he was in a band and he was a songwriter. And so he was traveling around Australia playing gigs and, recording albums and things like this. And so what they needed was a manager. But while I was in Singapore, I couldn't manage them because I was in Singapore, they were in Australia. And so we hired a manager. He was from Microsoft, and he was like the national sales manager from Microsoft. And take someone out of the software industry and get them to manage a band, it was outrageous. We become, that band called Gus and Frank, it became the largest independent Australian rock band at the time. Had number one hits and all sorts of, high rotation on radio and on TV and video hits and all that. And I was in Singapore building the website because that was something I could do from Singapore. And I hurt my back, I can't remember how. And I remember lying on the floor with my laptop building this website, and it was outrageous. We're talking maybe 2002, 2003, and I'm building a website where you could sign up to the website. We were building a fan base. You could order merch. You could cruise the gallery of all their gigs and all their photos. You could get access to their music. So at this time, Apple would just release this thing. You might have heard of it called iTunes, and it disrupted the entire music industry. And so at this moment, when he said, "Do you want to start a record label?" everything was moving from CDs and cassettes and LPs to digital, and it was completely disrupted. So what we did is we went out on a limb when I moved back to Australia and became the second iTunes content aggregator in the world. So the first one was Amped, the Orchard Group in New York, and then we became the first in Australia, obviously second in the world. And we started helping build an ecosystem in Australia where we'd get young people from primary school, high school, teach them how to sing, play drums, guitar, and we had bought a warehouse. And we go take them to the warehouse and we record them, and then they do a Christmas sort of concert for their parents or whatever. And then the good ones, we would record and release and publish their music, and then we'd take them on tour with us. And we toured with Jimmy Barnes and John Farnham and Delta Goodrem and I don't know, whoever, the Whitlams, Missy Higgins, all these different artists at the time. And so we were touring around Australia taking these young artists, and we ended up creating an entire ecosystem.
What I think I hear you saying there, and in some modest way I felt I saw this with Four Pillars, was this opportunity of digital and then social technology to close the gap between people and the brands and the bands they loved, and to create this sense of intimacy and relationships, sometimes offline, sometimes online. And it was an extraordinary opportunity, wasn't it, from sort of the early 2000s, then into the rise of social media, which hopefully is a good pivot into Up. So what did you think you were building at the beginning? Were you trying to build a bank, or were you trying to create something that changed people's relationship with money?
Up was never trying to be a bank. It was always trying to help the next generation of Australians with financial literacy. That's what we wrote on the whiteboard, and that's what we did. And we wanted to have great people in a great environment building great things. That was like our mission. It was our goal. My very first commercial software that I built, I was about 16, 17, and it was a live data feed to the Australian Stock Exchange. And then I built a share market simulation program when Windows had come out. And then Windows 95. And then just after that, I think the first version was with Windows 3.1, and then we moved to Windows 95. And it was software that came in a box on a CD, originally on disc and then on a CD, and it was available for you to buy in the shop. So my first fintech was actually built when I was 16, and it was a commercial software package. I then built a game, and it was a game for kids so that they could trade pork bellies. And what they didn't realize is it was using that live data feed, this time to the US market. And people who clocked the game, like one of my mate from kindergarten, the one who had the dad at the CSIRO, he clocked my game, and it was called the Money Machine. And what he didn't realize was that he was trading with real data. He actually made $1 million. But we never executed the trades.
A theoretical million.
Theoretical $1 million, and because it was simulation, right? And so I did that in my teens. Then I went and did all the SAP stuff. Then we had the record label, and then moving into the grain exchange and other things that we did along the way. One thing that we did just before Up, we built some of the world's first apps.
Okay, I'm just going to jump in here really fast, as I will do from time to time throughout the Storyworks series. You get this sense here of someone who didn't just have an extraordinary early family life, but a really extraordinary early founder journey from the music business into the payment space. Don was responsible for more than half a dozen different businesses. We could not keep every story, every business in the edit. That's going to be on the Substack. But for now, I really want to drill down into the foundation of Up.
I've been doing fintech since before it was called fintech. Like when I was building that live data exchange, that live data feed to the Australian Stock Exchange, no one was doing that. There's a company that came out of that now, a few companies. One of them's called Norgate, another one's called Paratech. These guys were early pioneers, and I was working with them at the time. They went on to create great data companies. So I feel like, in answer to your question, it's all of those great people that I surrounded myself with, from multimedia, graphic designers, product people, engineers, user experience designers, video production, special effects, engineers writing software, like all these incredible people, and we all coalesced at Ferocia. And it was the bringing together of that greatness that made Up so extraordinary, because we'd worked together for so long. We all had a dream. The dream was, how do you, being frustrated with banking, how do you take a leaf from other amazing Australians? I've got to tell you this. I know I'm rambling a bit, but I've got to say this. We travelled around the world looking at all the digital banks, and 3 of the very first, very early digital banks in the world, and one of them still around today. There was Movin by Brett King. There was Simple by Josh Reich. And then there was Monzo, and Simon was one of the co-founders. All 3 of them are Australian. They were the 3 first and greatest. So Simple was the first, Movin was one of the most well-known, and then obviously Monzo's still going today. Back then it was Mondo. Those 3 Aussies were founders, co-founders in those 3 amazing digital banks. And I'm back here in Australia with all my 20, 30 years of experience saying, how can Australians be disrupting the world, but there's no disruption happening at home? So we had an impetus, we had a reason to do it, and we were just surrounded by these incredible people. Like, the brand is so amazing because the storytelling, the engineering effort that went into it, the illustration, the animation, the colours, the design, the feel, like thinking about what you wanted to convey, the emotion, like all of that stuff was the people.
Fundamentally, you're in this category where people could be very excited by a brand and very engaged by a brand, but then they'd go, do I trust you with my money, with my loan, with my livelihood? Yeah. How much did you have to be conscious of that balancing act?
There was. I remember the day. I remember the moment, the minute that sunk in. So there were a bunch of incredible people. One was the head of design, Werner, and another was what I called our chief imaginer, who was our head of product, which is Anson. Anson and Werner were working hard. The first version of Up, so a couple of things. Anson, we weren't called Up. We were called Alt originally. And we couldn't use that. Alt.com was a BDSM website, and the bank and the regulators probably didn't think that was very cool. We thought it was cool. Our customers thought it was cool. But we were making T-shirts and hats, and we needed to think about the brand. So we did a branding exercise. And we were trying to come up with the name. And the hilarious thing is, a lot of other digital banks that came along later used some of those names that we came up with. But the one that stuck was Up. And Anson came back from one weekend of thinking. Remember, he's our chief imaginer. We pay him to think. And he goes away for the weekend, has a glass of wine, goes for a swim or whatever, and has this epiphany. He comes back and he goes, the domain name's available. Well, it's for sale. We hadn't secured it yet, but like to get a 2-letter domain name, you can't protect the name Up, like the 2 letters, it's a common word, and it's actually the example that's used. Up, yes and no are the 3 words they use in the IP Act to say the words you can't protect. I think yes might have been yes, no, and Up. And then we thought Optus did a really good job with yes. Maybe you don't have to protect it, but we could do a really good job with Up. Anyway, we ended up buying the domain name, was very expensive. And he came with this little paper and he said, I've got this thing. So the first version, the first logo was me and Anson just hacking around, and I've still got the original files. It's amazing to look at all the different things we tried. And we had a designer, Hannah, who was helping us. She was our first designer. And then Werner came along, and I remember that moment, to your question, I remember the moment. I'm standing at the whiteboard and Werner said to me, if we're going to build trust, we need to be thinking differently. We've done a partnership with Bendigo, and people trust Bendigo. They've won for many, many years, maybe 10 years in a row, Australia's most trusted bank. So we think, well, people will trust us by osmosis.
There's a baked-inness through
because
that
we have this partnership. But how do you gain trust for a new brand like Up? And I just want to jump ahead, and I'll come back to answer the question, is I met, I think, the head of strategy or something like head of innovation or something like that at Qantas one day. And this is 10 years later. And he said to me, I love what you guys have done with Up. To me, it's on par with Qantas as in the Australian sort of zeitgeist as one of the great brands to come out of this country. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially those words. I was nearly in tears because Australia, Qantas is the spirit of Australia. How could Up, a brand that we'd only created 10 years earlier be so well loved and so well recognised. Anyway, so I'm at the whiteboard and building up to that moment, and no one knew up. We hadn't launched the app. No one cared about it. And he wrote on the board, people love their apps. People love Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, Google, Facebook. People love those apps. They put them on the homepage of their phone. He was our head of design. They put them on the homepage of their phone, and those apps have something special, which is a user experience that's second to none. They put all their energy and effort into building these extraordinary user experiences that are addictive and that people really, really love. Once you start getting involved with an app like that, whatever the app is that you put on your homepage back in these days in 2017, 2018, once you put an app on your homepage, that's the app that you click on 20, 30, 50 times a day. And so the insight was, he said to me, if you want people to trust us, they don't need to trust us as a bank. They need to trust us as a brand. And we're not benchmarking ourselves against Combank, ANZ, Westpac, NAB, ING, Macquarie. We're benchmarking ourselves against Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok. Suddenly, the brand up came alive. And it came alive because we were no longer thinking that it would be a bank. We were thinking that it would be a brand, and it would be a brand that people would love.
This is, in a way, the whole podcast. This was such an exciting moment when, you want a guest to say something and then they actually say it. Here was a guy trying to build a bank brand that wasn't just anchored in trust and in respect, but aiming for something higher that, frankly, for most people would be completely unrealistic to get people to love their bank. And yet that's exactly what Up did. What I then found really fascinating was, well, what does it take to do that? What kind of culture do you need to build? What kind of people do you need to attract? You think about banking as a career, it attracts people who want to manage money and manage risk. And now we need to attract people who want to tell stories and who want to take risks.
I mean, this is so exciting. We have a full-time illustrator on team. We have a full team that are just doing design. We have a team that just do merch. As the team grew, it's so exciting. I would say there's a bunch of elements. My business partner and I were very different. And I'm like the infectious enthusiasm, sort of the entrepreneur, crazy, eccentric, creative. And he was very focused on culture and strategy. And, I love Tomo, and there's so much about our relationship over those 15 years that I would say we were the yin and the yang. And so Tomo and I were so welcoming and creating such an extraordinary team and extraordinary culture that it was infectious, and it dragged people in the slipstream, and nobody wanted to leave. Everyone wanted to work there. People would say it was like Google in South Melbourne. We had a fantastic office. Tomo would take us down to his farm on the Great Ocean Road and put on a spit roast, and it was just, the culture was the main thing. And that culture, that love, that passion manifested in the product and the brand. And so if I take, for example, Pete Johnson, the brand father, he is an extraordinary human being. But you look at the influences of the Up brand, and it's surfing and skateboarding and music and anti-culture. And I remember the first presentation he did, there was him and another guy called Josh, and Josh had come from Quicksilver, and those two guys pitched us. And Tomo had found them through one of his mates. Tomo's extremely well connected. And they got up and they put this slide up on the screen, and it didn't talk about banking. It didn't talk about competitors. It didn't talk about the colour blue or the colour black. It talked about heart and soul. They said, the culture here, the people, the team, this is what creates a brand. And when they put that up on the screen, they had some thoughts and ideas. They said, Dom, you're a creative, you're a founder, you're a technologist, you're a designer. What do you call someone like that? And he said, this is not for external facing, but internally, you're like the God founder. You're like a founder that people look up to. People are inspired by. People will follow you. You've got disciples. You've got this incredible team of people that want to create. And when he positioned it like that, and he started talking about what is the heart of this brand, what are we trying to achieve, and what does it mean for us to reciprocate love, to manifest that love through the product, through the app, through the website, through our merch, through our brand out on a billboard, and then to have people bring that back tenfold. Our largest growth sort of vector for us was word of mouth. Over 80% word of mouth. People who just loved it would tell their mates how much they loved it. So then what's the soul? What is our mission? What is our objective? What are we trying to achieve? What are we on this earth to do? And we're on this earth to help the next generation of Australians with financial literacy. We wanted the next generation of Australians to have what we didn't have. And there were so many crazy things happening. Well, what was happening for us? There'd been the Royal Commission. There was this hatred, this tall poppy syndrome of the big banks. People were, rapidly building brands online. There were apps. There were, technology was changing. Silicon Valley had the boom and the bust, and everything was changing. We had this moment in time where we could build something extraordinary, and we could build a brand that helped people to be literate. Now, the big thing that was happening in Moneyland was tangible money was going away. And what we used to say was that, imagine when I was a kid, we had the money purse, a little pink purse, a gold purse that sat on
I had my Paddington Bear money box.
And you had one from Paddington, or you had one from the Commonwealth Bank, or your Dolomites account, whatever, and you'd put your coins in it. And then you'd carry a roll of notes in your pocket, or you'd have a money clip. And money was tangible. And when you hand money over, you can feel the pain of losing that money, giving it to the shopkeeper or whatever it is. And when you carry it in your pocket, it's heavy. Now, this next generation of Australians that would use Up would never experience that. They only knew money as digital. And when they would send money to a shopkeeper, or when they would buy a skateboard, or when they would buy a coffee, or when they would, put money into an online gambling account, when that money would just disappear. And it was just
frictionlessness of the
completely
tap.
gone. Yeah. There was nothing there. So we went about thinking, how do you use your senses to understand money?
So there's you growing through word of mouth, growing through sort of almost like anti-establishment storytelling and design. Were you helped by the fact that ultimately you just had to answer to yourselves?
I mean, I think in hindsight, yes. We didn't know it at the time. Maybe Tomo did. Tomo's 20 years older than me, so I learned a lot from Tomo. He's an extraordinary. He's led an extraordinary life, and he used to be in AFL football coaching, and so to him, culture was everything. And the culture of the brand, the culture of the team, the culture of the industry, the culture of Australia, the culture of what we're doing, the disruption, the culture of disruption. That was everything to Tom. I spent a lot of time thinking about that. So many things I could just reflecting on the relationship that we developed. We're friends for life. I think there's there's something to be said for using your own money, for bootstrapping. And, Up was this extraordinary success, one of the great successes of, the fintech, any technology company in Australia. Some people ask me, did we exit too early? Tomo had this philosophy that always leave something on the table for the next one, for the next company, the next person, the next people. Always leave something. I think, we exited at the right time for us. We'd mortgaged our houses so many times. We'd begged, borrowed and stole from so many friends and family. And, we'd funded that business in the only way we knew how, which was blood, sweat and tears, hard work. Every dollar that we made went back into the team. A lot of people took pay cuts. A lot of people worked late nights, worked weekends, public holidays. I mean, it was a real slug. And there were so many moments, a dozen times, where we might not have come out the other end. And if it wasn't for that relationship with Tomo and the trust between us, a lot of that love and passion and trust manifested also in the product. I think that the brand has an enormous part of it, but the brand is a manifestation of that. The camaraderie in the team, the passion for excellence, the excellence of everything, the best engineers and designers in the world, the best multimedia and graphic and visual designers, illustrators, animators, all these amazing, it's like ILM. I don't know if you've ever seen the TV series, a documentary of Industrial Light and Magic. Oh my God, you've got to watch it. But the story of Pixar or the story of ILM, building Star Wars or building Toy Story. And I read not too long ago, I forgot the name of the book now, but the founding of Pixar and the acquisition by Disney and all this sort of stuff. And if you replaced Disney with Bendigo Bank and Pixar with Ferocia, that's exactly how Up was created.
I think there's two wonderful sort of acts of, I'd call it almost like entrepreneurial humility that you've described. One is to go, you know what, we don't have to be great at the boring side of banking. we can partner with someone who's good at that. And that bakes in trust and sort of those tentacles into community and that sense of authority. And we get that from Bendigo. And that means we can then focus as an up team on the extraordinary edge that we can build through culture, through storytelling, through design that no one out of traditional banking can. I think that's really clever. I think a lot of people in your position would have gone almost greedily, we need to build it all. We need to do it all our own way. And I think that partnership play was really impressive and really visionary of you. And then I think, I get asked the same question. Did you exit Four Pillars too soon? And I sort of say, well, look, there was a point at which our risk appetite as founders, we'd mortgaged our homes. We'd done everything to give the business the best chance of success. And you're like, it's someone else's turn now. There's a next, the whistle's gone on the game, but the next game is already beginning and we're kind of puffed. And what I love about what you've done though, is you didn't exit and then walk away. You've exited up, but then you've gone straight back into the game and started to, as you've always done, reinvest and keep building and keep trying to create platforms for others to build. So talk a bit about what you are now building in terms of the funds you're building and the next ecosystem of innovation.
I didn't just sell Ferocia up. I sold 3 companies during COVID, and one was Ferocia to Bendigo Bank, and I couldn't think of a better custodian for it than our business partner who helped us to create it. It was a wonderful transition. I got to sit on the advisory board for 3 years. It was an extraordinary thing, and I still am so proud. I see Up all the time. Is there things I'd do differently or things I think I could do better? Of course, but I look at it fondly rather than critically. And I'm so proud when I'm walking down the street and someone comes up and wants a selfie or a high five and whatever. It's amazing. It's a great feeling. So each of those businesses created a pool of capital. The pool of capital meant I could, like what they call a family office, I could make investments and so on. And with that pool of capital, I felt very privileged and very grateful for the opportunity to come out of COVID, all the lockdowns and all that sort of stuff, with a whole pile of cash. And what I did with that money was to reinvest it back into the industry that helped create me. I don't know what else you could do with it, like buy a yacht, buy a helicopter, I don't know, go traveling, whatever. For me, having a family and, spending time with my dog and riding my bicycle, these are the things, that's what life's about. So it wasn't like very materialistic and thinking, what is it that can I buy? So what I did instead is I've invested about 100 million into the Australian ecosystem. And we backed mostly, this is through the family office, Euphemia it's called. Now Euphemia is, again, it's a moment in time. AI is disrupting everything. The Australian venture capital industry is on a precipice. It's 17 billion in size. It needs to be 170, 1.7 trillion. It needs to compete globally. There's laws changing. We're losing talent. There's this. So like with the Grain Exchange, like with the record label, like with Up, there's this moment in time where right now feels like my job is to help elevate the Australian startup ecosystem. I can do that through storytelling. I can do that through branding. I can do that through investing. I can do that through mentorship. I can do that through public policy. I met with Treasury yesterday because of all this chaos that's going on with the new budget. And, on the weekend in my spare time, I wrote a policy. And I'm not a politician. I'm not a policy writer, but there's this moment in time where everything's changing. And so I felt like the biggest impact I could have is to use that capital to help create more DOMs, to help create more Four Pillars, to help create more Ups, more Canvas, more Atlassians, more Envados, these more culture amps, more these entrepreneurial spirit, the Australian spirit. Like I have a lot of money, but I don't have enough money to change the entire venture startup ecosystem in Australia. It needs to be a group effort. We need to have a cultural movement. We need all the venture capitalists to work together. We need all the private equity. We need the debt funders. We need the crowd funders. We need the angel investors. We need everybody to rally together. So suddenly the Startup Network represented this opportunity to expand nationally. And I've been making investments in women, female founders, female allocators, fintech, because I'm Mr. Fintech. I won Fintech Leader of the Year 3 times. So I was investing in fintech because that's what I knew. Climate tech. I've been investing in climate tech for 30 years, 25 years, I think at the time. So we're 5 years into the journey and we've deployed all my capital. Then we suddenly thought, well, you know what? We've got to deploy other capital. So I've invested into 23, mostly Australian venture capital funds, but not just venture capital, private equity, venture capital, crowdfunding, angel investing, debt funding, every type of capital that fuels the Australian innovation disruption ecosystem. You want creativity, you want venture capital, you want entrepreneurship, you need money. So I put all the money into all those different things. That creates leverage. Every one of those 23 funds, we're in 32 32 vintages, and a vintage is just another year of the same fund. So 32 funds out there I've invested in. Each one of them has invested in 100 companies. You multiply that out, there's thousands of companies now that I've invested in. Through the family office directly, we were able to invest in 60, 70 companies. Through these, through leverage, through these funds, we've been able to invest in many, many more. Then we started co-investing. We would lead an investment, and I would say, okay, we're going to invest in this little company called BuildKite. It just spun out of Pin Payments. Ferocia, Up was the first customer. Now it powers Uber, Airbnb, SpaceX, Reddit, Anthropic, OpenAI, every company you can think of, Shopify, Spotify. Now it powers every great brand in the world, but it started in Perth. Co sort of has an office in Melbourne. It's a small team that are going on to greatness. They're getting close to 100 million per year in revenue. And so I would lead around into BuildKite, but I can only put in $1 million. That's as much as I can afford to put in. I don't have more than that. I've already deployed 100 million. I then introduced them to Airtree, and Airtree would come in, and they might be able to put 10 million or 20 million or 30 million. So we did Zepto, we did Constantinople, we did BuildKite, we did all these amazing businesses where we would co-invest with SquarePeg, Airtree, Blackbird, Main Sequence, all these different Artesian, these different Australian venture capital firms. So not only are we investing in the venture capital firms, but then we're co-investing in them. So the amount of capital impact that I can have as one human. And by the way, I didn't have 100 million. I borrowed a lot of that money. So maybe 100 million would be my cap. That's the most impact I can have. But by co-investing, by leading rounds and bringing other people in, by building syndicates, we built a syndicate network and we got all these high net worths and we run syndicate deals. We're oversubscribed every single, except for one, every single syndicate deal we ever did. I was able to bring billions and billions of dollars to the Australian tech ecosystem.
And it's leverage, it's amplification, it's impact, as you say. You're having an extraordinary individual impact, but it's having an impact beyond any one
anything
person.
I could do.
Two questions. I asked them both at the same time. What do you, as an investor and a mentor and someone who's got the most extraordinary track record, what do you look for in great founders and great founding teams? And also, as an Australian and as someone who has, dare I say, brought an Australian and maybe even a Melburnian sort of personality and sort of zest and energy to the world of banking, are there particular types of businesses that you think Australians are particularly good at building?
Yeah. And as Australians and New Zealanders have always been inventors, curiosity, creative entrepreneurs, eccentric, a little bit different, thinking about the world or seeing it with a different lens. And I reflect on my mate with his dad at the CSIRO. He invented paint, the polymer in plastic paint. Anything in the world that's painted, invented here in Australia. Carbon fibre, invented here in Australia. Wi-Fi, invented here in Australia. There's so many amazing things. What we're not good at is scaling and commercializing that, So the CSIRO is possibly funded now by the royalties from Wi-Fi, if not fully in part. And that's a good success story, and everyone knows that one. But does anyone know about plastic money? Does anyone know about satellites and aeroplanes and Formula One cars and anything built out of carbon fibre? The battery cells for the Tesla Powerwall invented in Canberra. A Google Maps invented in Sydney. There's all these amazing things that Australia has to do. So my view is that Australians are very, very good at financial services, very, very good at innovation and creativity, very good at software engineering. People that recognise it, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Jack Dorsey, Jeff Bezos, these people know how good Australians and New Zealanders are, and they recruit us. And so a lot of people will be working at Tesla or SpaceX or Amazon or, AWS have been brutal in recruiting Australian talent. Google, Apple, Facebook, Instagram, all these companies are recruiting Australian talent. And so what I like to do is think about what we call boomerangs. You can't stop an Australian from being successful, and they're just going to go for it, right? And so you want to encourage them to be successful. Go overseas, learn new things, build new networks, learn different cultures, experience the world, but then come back. That's a boomerang. Someone who leaves and comes back. When they come back, we want to leverage that.
I've got two last questions. The first is, we've maybe broken the all-time podcast record for getting this far and still not talking about the T-shirt. So you got a T-shirt that says Triple Bubble.
Yeah.
Tell me about Triple Bubble.
Yeah, so Triple Bubble is Australia's first dedicated fintech fund of its kind. We do. There's lots of other people that have invested in fintech, but there's a peculiarity in the regulations in Australia where the financial services regulation is very strict. You've got to be licensed to do most of the things in financial services. And there's this little quirk that says if you're an ESVCLP, which is an early stage venture capital limited partnership, so if you're a venture capitalist, you can't invest in a regulated company, a company that is regulated, unless you get permission from the government, you get an exemption. And then if something goes wrong, you don't just lose the tax benefit for that one investment, you lose the tax benefit for your entire portfolio. So there's an enormous amount of risk in Australian venture startup funders investing in fintech. And so to me, it's the same thing. I'm coalescing around that opportunity and saying, well, I can try and change the law, which is what I'm doing, trying to get the regulations changed. At the same time, I can, the new budgets come out and they've got, new ideas about what they want to do. And there's a carve out in the new budget that says we'll consult with the startup ecosystem. I've been working with the Tech Council, working with FinTech Australia, talking to Treasury, trying to work out how we can do that. I can do all that, but that's going to take years. What if I just start my own fund, a brand new fund that can become an industry fund that is not an ESVCLP, that doesn't come foul of the regulation? It doesn't get the tax concession, sure, but my controversial public statement is that anyone that needs the tax concession isn't a very good fund manager. Like tax concession, I welcome a tax concession. It's a bonus. I love a tax concession. I'm negotiating it for the industry at the moment, but I don't need it to be successful. It's a bonus, like a dividend. So for me, I wanted to create a fund, Triple Bubble. And the reason it's called Triple Bubble is I was explaining this idea to everyone, and I kept saying, well, overseas they have Triple Bubble funds where they do secondary market investing, which is buying shares from the founders and the other investors, primary market investing, which is normal equity investing into a startup like a venture capitalist, and then public markets investing with public companies. So that's much more common in Europe and the US, but in Australia there is not a single fund that is a Triple Bubble fund. And I'm like, I'll just call it Triple Bubble.
So highly diversified Triple Bubble, but with this singular intent of supporting the fintech.
Focused on fintech.
The scale of your ambition, the scale of your vision, the generosity of your vision, like always, whenever you talk about anything that you have built or you're trying to build, it's as much about the platforms you're creating for other people to grow and express themselves. And your vision of the future is incredible. Let's finish by going back to teenage Dom. And you've got the Apple computer at home, you're watching Star Trek on TV, things aren't all going great, you've got family tragedy, you've got all sorts of rocks thrown in your way, but through that, you are resilient and you keep moving forward and you keep seeing a future. As we sit here today in 2026 with, more, computers much more powerful than the Apple computer sitting in the chips of everything and AI coming in and disrupting everything and so much uncertainty and I think an unease about the world and where it's heading. What is your sense of, your case for optimism as we look forward over the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Yeah, I'm an eternal optimist, so I always look for the best in people and the best in opportunities, the best in the world. So it's very hard for me to be concerned or upset about AI. It's very hard for me to be concerned about compute. It's very hard for me to imagine that the computer power that got us to the moon was less than my Apple II. So none of those things are in themselves replacing who we are or what we do. They're tools, and those tools can accelerate our excellence. And if Australians are resilient and curious and confident and entrepreneurial and eccentric and love to disrupt and cut down the tall poppy and dominate on a global scale and all these sort of things, isn't that just an opportunity for Australia to punch above our weight? Use that new technology, use that compute, use that AI to dominate whatever it is that you're passionate about. And that's the way I think about the future. And I think that if more people had that level of insight, Australia could represent more, maybe double digits of the world rather than 2 or 3% of the world.
Dom Pym, we're going to finish there. That was just extraordinary. I could go on all day, but podcast rules don't allow it. Thank you so much for joining me.
No worries. Thanks for having me. It was great.
Storywork was brought to you in partnership with Slingshot. As you've heard in today's episode, stories really matter, and there is no story more important than the one you tell your customers. But finding the right time, place, channel, and medium through which to tell that story is critical, and that's where my great friends at Slingshot come in. Slingshot pride themselves on developing creative media strategies to propel their clients further, faster. You can find out more about the brilliant work that Slingshot does, helping brands find their audiences, tell their stories, and achieve their objectives at slingshot.com. storywork.com.au. And talking about finding out more, you can find out more about this and every episode of Storywork, including all the show notes and all of my key learnings from every conversation over on Substack.